Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Ben Kingsley, how are you?
G'day, mate. How are you?
Very good. I'm enjoying this sort of easy start to the podcast now at the beginning. Now Jason's done all the heavy lifting for me.
So he's a good operator, Jace.
So today, Ben, we are going to unpack the PIPA annual sentiment survey.
The investor sentiment survey, Bryce.
So that's hot off the press.
Hot off the press.
So before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping for those playing along at home who like Escape from the City, Ben.
Yep.
I'm on tonight.
On tonight?
Yep. Swimming on the Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, nice. So up Cairns Way?
Up Cairns Way.
Or Port Douglas Way?
Port Douglas, to be more specific.
Okay, well, not the Whitsunday Islands.
No.
No, not Bowen. Not through Mackay.
Are we going to rattle off the whole map, are we?
All the different... Well, it's 1,800 kilometres, isn't it, the Great Barrier Reef? Do you give a few stats?
Well, I locked in Port Douglas, but I said yes to that, you said no to a few others. So go on, show us your, back to the old tourism days. Crack out some stats of the Barrier Reef for me.
Well, what would you like to know?
Oh, that's a good time buying technique. I like it.
Well, I think, it's...
How long's the reef?
It's the longest living organism in the world.
Yep.
I think it's about 1,800 kilometres
right.
from top to bottom. Okay. It's the only living thing you can see from space.
Okay.
Other than, obviously, you can see land and potentially greenery on land. But the highest concentration of fish species in the world.
Yep.
I think it's also got the highest concentration.
Oh, you got your rhythm back now?
Coral species.
You're recalling stuff now, you're back.
Yeah, I went out there a good 30 odd times.
Yeah, that was a good part of the world. Yeah, before you had to bang on, with me each and every week.
Yes, no, if you've never been out to the Great Barrier Reef, as Molly Meldrum will say, do yourself a favour. Get out and have a look. It's amazing.
Escape from the City, ABC tonight, 8 p.m.
Yep.
For those of you who would love to support the ABC and the wonderful program that is Escape from the City, that'll be terrific. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/relay for life, last week we talked about some details. If someone would like to support us in that initiative, we are looking to raise $5,000. We are getting close, Ben, but we need a couple of extra donations to get us over the line, so that'd be very, very helpful.
And then, so we're all walking for 24 hours, not 24 hours, 12, 15 hours straight.
It's a lot. It's overnight.
It's overnight, yes. We'll be walking.
1 a.m. shift, a 2 a.m. shift.
2 a.m.
You're turning up for the 3 a.m. shift, so well done. Pick up. 31st of October.
Yeah, well, just a quick reminder again for our Melbourne people who are in Melbourne. Greville Paps will be presenting an update on the property market in Victoria. So details in the show notes. I spoke about it last week, but if you haven't checked it out, if you're free on on the 31st of October, 7 p.m, all the details are in the Eventbrite link is there as well. Free book, Bryce.
And just a reminder about the free book, Ben, because we've got an opportunity where you can get the Make Money Simple Again book. Going to makemoneysimpleagain.com.au. It's free. The digital version is free, Ben, and we're not going to keep it up there forever.
No.
So if you're thinking you want to get a copy of that, now's the time.
Speaking of limited opportunities, Bryce, Suburb Growth. It's had a great response. We've been thrilled with the launch of Suburb Growth. So if you're not familiar with Suburb Growth, if you haven't listened to a couple of episodes back, we launched a capital growth prediction software where you can get predictions of 3 years of capital growth for suburbs, for houses or units for under $20. And remember, our listeners get a great discount on that. So it's only $14.95, but again, it's for a limited time only. So
discount code is?
Discount code is TPC25, Bryce. I don't believe you even asked me that. I just know it straight off the top. There you go. So
if only people at home could realise that there was a little bit of magic editing going on there, because we actually had to ask Iris a question. She cut that bit out.
That's
then we
not
go
true.
straight to that.
Well, where's the magic, Bryce?
Well, you've spawned over the last 254 episodes. I'm not going to let you have a free kick in front of goal on that one.
Very good. All right, let's get into the show.
All right, so we're going to talk about PIPA Annual Investment Survey.
Yes.
Sentiment survey, in fact.
What do we have to do before that normally, before we kick off?
Wow.
mindset minute.
I'm glad you asked, Ben.
Hey?
I'm glad you asked. We're going to flip it around today.
Oh, are we?
Yes.
Right. And so I've got to come up with something because you haven't
So
prepared
today our
anything.
mindset minute, Ben, is...
Oh, a mindset minute is own your... Is this me quote? Is this where I get to do a quote?
Yeah, because I asked you to come up with one.
Yeah. Or only about, 5 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't look for any different.
You're doing mindset minute life hack, and I'm doing did you know?
All right. Okay. So look, for me, it's real simple, right? I don't know, and I don't know.
Do I need to sit down for this one?
I don't know who came up with it, and I'm going to use a word that means that it's not a swear word,
Right.
but it's own your shite.
Right.
Right. Now, the idea behind that is just be accountable to yourself.
All right.
Right. So anything that there's too many people who are looking for outs in life, and it wasn't me, it was someone else. So it's just about a bit of ownership. Just take control. Taking responsibility for your own thing. So I don't know who coined the phrase first of all, but I'm a big believer in it. It's like if it is to be, it's up to me. And so own your
SH1T.
Own your shite.
Okay.
Right? I think that's really important.
I actually like that. My wife reminded me of that. I've told this story before, but I was frustrated when I had to drop a car off. You know when you're bolting to the airport?
Yes.
And you're absolutely trying to get there as quick as you can. You millimetres count. And then I get to the drop off the car, and the guy who was running through it was just like anal, and it was frustrating me because I don't know if you know, you do, I know you, but for those playing along at home, at the Brisbane airport, just north of Brisbane airport, there's a sort of in the North Lakes, is it, now I've even forgotten the name of the suburb, I think it's North Lakes, just on the north, so it's just a very small drive into the Brisbane airport.
Yep.
I fueled up there, fully fueled it up.
Yep.
Drove from there to the airport.
drop off.
The thing was still on full.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Can I see a copy of the receipt, please, for the petrol?" And I go, "Yep." And he goes, "Oh, you've fueled up off-site, so you need to go." And I've gone, "What do you mean?" He's gone, "Well, the next person is going to get the car with however long it took from you to get from that petrol station here, less on fuel." And I'm like, "Are you for real? The fuel gauge says full."
Fair dinkum.
And I'm already like annoyed because I'm trying to get on this plane. Now, in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
My approach was rubbish, but at the time I felt very justified and vindicated in what
I
I
would
was
have been
doing.
too. Like, what do you want me to do, mate? Where's the petrol
He
station?
wanted me to get back in the car and go back to the petrol station on the airport drive and fuel up that little extra bit that I just drunk a little bit.
Yeah.
And then bring it back.
80 mil. Yeah.
So or charge me $35.
Oh.
Right, so I was not happy, right? That's out of my offset account, Ben, Money Smarts, rewind to previous episode, you see what impact that has, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm not proud of this bit, but I actually lost it a bit with the guy. I sort of didn't agree. I didn't agree with his approach.
Did you use that? Do you know who I am?
No, I've never used that in my life.
Yeah, no.
But I just said, "Come on, mate."
Yes.
I said, "You're being a pinhead, right?"
Yeah.
I think you're majoring in minors on that one.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, I'm late for the plane. Andrew's going to be, and then as I walk, she's like, "That wasn't cool what you just did." I went, "What do you mean? He kept me late and all." I know this is a long story, but I'm getting to the point.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's longer than my quote.
Even I was the one. So I go, "What do you mean you made it late?" And Andrew goes, "He was just doing his job." And I went, "Oh, you pulled that one on me, right?"
Yeah.
So then, in reflection, I had to take responsibility, right? Because if I go back, I was running late at where I fueled up. And the reason I was running late is because I was at a friend's house prior to that. And I made a decision to leave later than I needed to leave, which had a flow-on effect for everything that happened.
Yep.
So therefore, I had to own my SH1T.
Yep.
It was painful because my wife just shone a big spotlight on me. And but she was right because I needed to take responsibility.
Oh, well, look, we've all been there. As much as I say own it, we can always have reminders and refreshers,
good practical examples that I needed your wisdom at that point in time.
Yeah. Well, no, I probably would have been in your camp. Are you serious? Are you serious?
I did say pinhead. I didn't say anything else. You're being a pinhead, but
oh yeah. Well, that's you never attack. Just attack the situation, not the person. Probably my little tip there.
Once a minute, I like it. So I'm going to stick around for your life hack.
Okay, beautiful, because it's a ripper.
All right, and stick around for my Did You Know. All right, let's dive in.
Sentiment survey. So Obviously, each year, and my previous life, I was on the board of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, but the great Peter Kalisos is now the chair of that great association. It's the peak association for the property investment industry, and each year they go off and survey to get a snippet or a snapshot of sentiment in the property investment market. So this year, almost 1,200 surveys, so probably one of the largest in Australia in regards to getting a snapshot. The survey was undertaken in late August, early September, and it was only released to us a week or so ago. So we've been able to slot it into our show, and we just wanted to highlight some of the key points in here, Bryce, didn't we?
We did, Ben. So there's some interesting feedback. So we'll roll through some, but what was most interesting is that 82% of investors felt that now is a good time to invest in residential property, which is up from 52% the previous year. So what that shows is, the confidence was rocked massively as a result of the uncertainty around what was going to happen with the negative gearing rules. So that sort of jump is significant, which also reflects a changing mood in property market
valuations, the whole bit, right? So, I mean, and we're on record of sort of saying we thought that it would be August, September before the market moved, and we're right in terms of we're now seeing very strong growth in the Melbourne and Sydney property markets after the correction that we've had. And it's also shown up in the Westpac survey in regards to confidence and so forth when people think it's a good time to buy property. So it's off the back of no changes in terms of the tax regime, which we'll take a deeper dive into a little bit later. It's also on the back of some more clarification around APRA's role in responsible lending and the release of money into the property market. So those things were also important. And obviously a little bit of confidence in regards to the economy, even though it's still sluggish, let's be honest. But, we're not going to have a very, very big tax regime flowing through. And so on the back of that, we're now starting to see the property prices move. And so in the 2018 result there, where we saw the stats, what were they showing again? They were showing 52%. So, that's moved materially to 82% of now people think it's not a bad time to invest. So, and we've also seen that in our location score data in terms of the number of people who are subscribing and all of the research tools that we provide to the marketplace. There is a real turn in terms of activity, purchasing activity on those sites, and that's showing up in our data as well in terms. So demand is back. So now the challenge is on the supply side.
Exactly. Definitely on the supply side. Interestingly, 98, and this is quote on the opening paragraphs, 98% of property investors have some form of idea, plan or strategy around their investing, so they know which direction they're heading. But the interesting part is 26%, or so 1 in 4, have a detailed and modelled plan designed to match their long-term investment goals. So that discrepancy, it'd be nice to see that sort of get a little closer, Ben, because 100% of the people know which direction they're heading in, which is some form of wealth, financial freedom, whatever it is. But having a detailed roadmap, that's there's still 3 out of 4 people who probably...
This correlates a lot of information for me, Bryce, in terms of gives me confidence in some respects for some people. Like if we just do the numbers, right, so 73% of investors only own one property, right? Yet 98% of investors have some form of idea. Now, whether they're then constituting the idea that I'm going to invest in property and I'd like to get the best return I possibly can and I can spend that much as being a plan, that's where they're falling over, right? Because the stats show in terms of you're probably still talking 5 to 10% of people do this successfully without any mistakes. So they buy 3, 4, 5, some buy even more, but very, very few people do it without mistakes. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about shining a light on some of those mistakes and then also shining a light in terms of the frameworks and the processes in which you would have to go through to eliminate or mitigate as much risk as you possibly can. So it still comes back and resonates right around Australia in terms of people who have detailed plans, whether it be financial plans or financial planners, are usually in that last quarter. Okay, so there's only 0.25% of people who actually get detailed financial advice. And the irony of that is it's usually the most wealthy who do that. Okay, and they get the best advice they possibly can and they usually win at the game. So that's a clue. That's a clue to anyone who's just starting out that if you're going to invest in property, given it's a high value transaction, you absolutely, in my view, need to get some professional advice in this space. Not just an idea, not just a lick of the finger and testing the air. Get educated, and we're glad.
Because you need to look over the hill, don't you? You need to look around the corner.
Yep.
And the challenge, and we've said it ad nauseum on this podcast, but the challenge for a lot of people is they've spent, the plane uses most of its fuel as it's taking off, so they're using most of their mental headspace to think about how do I actually get in, and not enough headspace about what happens when we're actually in. It's a bit like we put a lot of time and energy in planning the wedding, and we don't spend a lot of time planning the marriage, right?
Yep.
So in terms of, okay, sure, we understand that you've got a lot of overcoming of conditioning to get into, but there's so many things that are going to happen even if you just imagine your life as one big line with the life cycle, you have predictable parts of your life cycle which you need to be planning for. That needs to be factored in when you're putting in some leverage and when you're putting in investment property. So,
mate, that's good, and I think we'll finish off with a bit of that sort of professional advice piece, because I'm also a little bit worried in regards to where people are getting their advice from in terms of the subject matter experts that they're using, who may be moonlighting in the property investment space because there's an advantage for them, or not so much a conflict, but a windfall for them if someone goes and invests in property, like a mortgage broker, as an example.
What's interesting for people to use as a basis when they're listening to what we're going to read out here, Ben, is the majority of the respondents are termed investment veterans here, have purchased several properties. So 44% hold 2 to 4 properties, while another 17% hold 5 to 10. It's interesting for those people who are just started investing or just thinking about investing, the insights that you're going to get here from people who's not their first rodeo. Yeah,
definitely not their first rodeo. I mean, because it's natural, isn't it? I mean, this is the Peak Association, so all the businesses that are members of PIPA are sending this out to their databases, and their databases have got 1 or more properties. So we're getting some some clear insights in terms of where the smart money goes, I suspect, is probably the best way to look at it.
All right, let's kick it off with the highest percentage of what type of property would you buy, Ben?
For investment purposes, what was it, Bryce?
I thought it would have been off the plan apartments, Ben, but no, I was disappointed. It's actually 71% are houses. So freestanding houses, 71, townhouses and villas 6%, units and apartments 6%, house and land packages 3%, and 7% unsure in terms of, so obviously good news there is we've got a few people who are maybe future property investors who are giving us a bit of an indication. And then the timing of their activity, Bryce, in terms of when they're going to buy? Well, within the next 6 to 12 month time frame, Ben, 48% said in that time frame, 37% said no, future, and 15%, Ben, were still unsure.
The reason why they're unsure, because they probably haven't planned what that looks like. Now, this is probably one of my favourite questions when it comes to why are people investing in property.
Yes.
So, why invest in property is the question.
Tax benefits, Ben.
Okay, so let me just go through them. So short-term tax benefits, long-term rental, passive income, short-term cash flow, long-term capital growth, renovating for profit, short-term price growth. So Bryce, run through the numbers.
Tax benefits I thought would be the number one, Ben. It's last at 1%.
1%.
Then coming in, it's equal second last position with 4% for all of them. Short-term price growth, renovating for profit, and short-term cash flow. Cash flow. You like that? Short-term cash flow.
Not having a stroke or anything.
That's caffeinated.
Good. Okay.
4% for those 3.
Yep.
And come on, Ben, bring it home.
Well, passive $2,000 a week.
$2,000 a week.
There we go.
Yeah.
No, obviously 20% are looking for long-term rental passive income.
Yep.
Love it. 67%.
Come on, how much?
67% are looking for long-term capital growth.
Love it.
That's a winning combination. You get that growth and that income story together, and that is where you live.
Success leaves clues, folks.
Oh, and here we go in terms of...
Success leaves clues.
Why are they doing it, Bryce? Why are they investing in property?
I'm glad you asked that, Ben, because that's the next piece
it is the next question
that we've got. But in order of importance, why are you planning to invest in property, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
What I thought was interesting is the first one, of 31%, to provide a better life financially for myself and my family, at 31%. Then you come down the scale to the third last, is to become rich, which is almost another way of saying that, 2%. So you could see that people weren't, the sophisticated investors weren't chasing a
status bragging,
yep,
right?
Yep. It was all about foundational platform for their family.
Well, I think all of those top tier ones, so 31% providing for a better life financially, 26% are chasing self-funded retirement, 21% are chasing earlier options so they can work less, 10% are chasing building their retirement nest egg, 6% are thinking about legacy, so they're sort of saying providing for my children and my family, 2% I don't trust the government with my super, fair enough, 2% was get rich, 1% the government hasn't got enough money to pay a reasonable pension in my retirement, and another 1% said I don't want to be a financial burden on the government when I retire. So I think all of those are bedded into the consistent message that we say here, which is people taking care of their own financial story and putting their money to work, and property investment is obviously an option for them in doing that.
Hey Ben, those last two really tie into your mindset minute, because the people who are sophisticated property investors don't enter the blame game, because those last two, the government hasn't got enough money and I don't want to be a financial burden on the government, they're largely around outsourcing responsibility, whereas most people said, look, as you say, the top area was really the millionaire next door.
Yeah, just motivated to basically, if it is to be, it's up to me. And that's what I love about anyone who's taking an interest in direct property investing, taking an interest in managing their money better. They're basically saying, I'm going to own this. I might get some help and guidance along the way, but I'm going to own this. This is up to me. The government's not there to support me. I want to basically make sure that I can get through and build up a wealth base that can support my family, the kids' education, whatever it is that they're looking at. So I think that is a great news story there. All right, what do we got next, Bryce?
Now, in the shadows of a Banking Royal Commission and an interesting year last year, the question was, thinking about last year's Banking Royal Commission, are you now more likely to consider non-major bank lenders for your next mortgage? Well, 59% said yes. 3 out of 5 people said they are prepared to consider a non-major bank lender. 19% said no, and 22% were still undecided, Ben.
Well, so the two big news stories that we saw in 2017 and 2018 as APRA was also playing in that space. One was the Royal Commission in terms of responsible lending and borrowing power. The other one was this concept of reducing the amount of interest-only lending and also the serviceability cap as part of that. So, you know, we saw a lot of news stories coming out in 2018 about it's going to cause the market to drop by 40%, Bryce, remember that?
I do.
Market's going to drop by 40% because there's going to be all these investors who won't be able to be in a position where they can refinance, or they won't be able to afford owning their property when they move from interest only to principal and interest. Well, the stats are in again, and so it's still a material number, right? So still a quarter, so it was 24%, so just under a quarter, are basically saying they will have to sell in the next 12 months if they can't refinance their mortgage. So in other words, they have potentially overextended themselves. They've got caught up in the minutiae that was the booming property market and thought they had to gear themselves, when we always say it's all about cash flows and what you can sensibly afford over time. So they'll have to sell one or more of their investment properties in the past 12 months or in the future 12 months coming up. Now, what's interesting about that, I had a look at the data from 2018, and now that's down. So that's actually come down from higher levels where, you know, the 29% were unsure in terms of whether they'd be unable to, and 44% were basically saying they might have to sell their property. So we're seeing that move through. Now, you and I talked about a couple of times on the podcast back in the day that we didn't think it would be a material change like all of the commentators were suggesting, because property is all of the properties that were owned were scattered around the country, so there wasn't going to be a flood of properties coming on in one particular location. And secondly, everyone's interest-only terms were going to have
expire at different times,
different anniversary dates. So you weren't going to get this build-up of a flood of properties coming on the market, and we've seen that obviously show through in terms of the numbers. Now, of course, it happens in mining towns and some areas where the vast majority, like 70% of properties usually in mining towns, are owned by investors. So that's where it's risky. But when it's the other way around, where it's 70% owner occupier, 30% investor, you're not going to see that material risk coming into the system. So let's hope those economists and those naysayers in the property market learn from this, that it's not going to have that desired negative impact in risking the property market over time.
All right, moving on to specifics around some lending. We've got, given the current interest rate you're paying, at what rate differential would you consider refinancing your loan? 57% of the respondents said somewhere between 0.5 and 1%, Ben. You had at 0.1 percentage point it was 1%, 0.25 of a percentage point it was 8%, 0.5 of a percentage point is 27, 0.75 is 13, and 1% is 17. So those three, between 0.5 and 1%, made up almost 3 out of 5 people. And then greater than 1 percentage point is 11%, greater than 2 percentage points is 5%, and 3% I don't care what interest rate I pay, and 15% were unsure.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting number, right? I actually thought it would be higher. So when we're talking about half of 1% on a mortgage, and if you've got, 400, 500, 600,000, that's material. There's thousands of dollars there that you could be saving on that. But it does highlight, in terms of probably some of the lessons and understanding that sophisticated property investors have, and that is that the interest rate isn't necessarily everything to them. Having the ability to borrow, and it comes back to the question before where we talked about 59% would be happy to look at non-major banks and second-tier lenders for their lending. So we've been talking about this before. If lenders are too conservative in certain environments, you can still potentially get your money elsewhere. You may have to pay slight premium, but in other cases, even some of those non-bank lenders have cheaper interest rate, and it's a good flow on into this next question, which we'll get to, which is what was the main reason for choosing a non-bank lender? Now, 35% of it said cheapest interest rate, which I think, so that's good. So one, you might be getting borrowing power, so they're obviously a bit more competitive. You don't have to go to the majors if you don't want to. And then 26 was the second, 26% said increased borrowing power. This is the one I'm talking about. And 23% said the broker. So this shows the subject matter expertise of a broker. Now, in some cases, the regulators think that, is the broker doing the right thing by the customer? Well, because they're sort of saying, okay, are you sending those clients because you get greater borrowing power and that means you earn more money? Or are you sending them there because they've got a better interest rate, plus the borrowing power, which may allow you to buy in a better area where you're going to get a better return? So I'm really fascinated in terms of where these reviews and debates are going to happen around best interest duties that's going to come into the mortgage broking space and the lending space and responsible lending, because I would argue that if a broker is sending me to the cheapest interest rate, but also giving me potentially better borrowing power, I'm like, well, isn't that the best interest of the customer?
Lock and load.
In other words, if the best interest of the customer is, I've come to see you about an investment property, finance, I've spoken to a property investment advisor, I'm coming, so I want you to do the best job for you. You can, and if it's all just about the interest rate, well, they may not be doing the best. If it's all just about the borrowing power, but it's the combination of those things that make it really important. Everything else just didn't even register. Like in terms of better credit policy conditions, only 6%, 1% better property valuations, 1% quicker response times, 3% don't want to support a major bank, 3% better product features, 2% cheaper fees and charges. But it was real. They're 35% cheaper interest rate, 26% borrowing power, and 23% led by their broker, who's educating them on their choice. So I think the broker is certainly being shined I would have thought in a reasonably good light there because of the work that they're doing in regards to that.
And anecdotally on the ground, we saw within our own team, we saw a lot of second tier lending, particularly over the last 12 months. So, but yeah, you're right. A combination of increased borrowing power and cheaper interest rate. What'd be interesting is to talk to the people who just purely went for cheaper interest rate, because whether or not they lost any of the structural advantages that they had from previous lending structures, just chasing that. So for those of you that aren't cutting full laps on ours, we don't recommend that you chase cheaper interest rate just for that sake. It needs to be a secondary consideration because borrowing strategy is more important than borrowing power.
And if you think about it, I mean, Bryce, we build property investment plans. You know that. That's the work that we do, and these are very complex plans over a period of time to buy 3 or 4 really good properties and hold them for the long term to live off the passive income. That's what we do, right? Now, what's interesting about that is when we first started building these plans, back in the day when there was no doc and low doc and servicing calculators were quite generous, our models were always more conservative in terms of recommending a certain purchase price compared to what the banks would lend. now fast track through this transition period of 16, 17, 18, our models are now, in terms of probably a little bit more leaning towards balanced or slightly more around what you can afford, but the banks won't lend it to you because they've gone, basically 90 degrees in the other direction. So for us, in terms of what you were saying before about how we did move to some of the second tier lenders, the reason we did that is because we wanted our clients to stay on plan, right? And they got into a money smarts routine and they're organising their money, and we were really comfortable in terms of responsible lending to know what they're doing, and we've got these cash flow models. So if we said, right, we still want you to buy that $750,000 property and it's still within your budget, but your mainstream lender may not be able to lend that to you, but this lender over here will, and just so happens that the rates are just as competitive and the credit policy and the response time and the service might be a little bit better. So on balance, our customers who trust our judgment were basically following on that story. So that was good news for us, because we obviously had done this cash flow modelling for these clients and we knew what was plausible for them. They demonstrated that good. If they had demonstrated that they were overspending or whatever, we would tweak that model, because again, no plan is set in concrete. You tweak that model to adjust for what they can afford comfortably, or if their circumstances have changed. But it just goes to show you there are a lot of moving parts in regards to that.
The previous question about why invest in property, Ben, 1% of people said short-term tax benefits, but when you follow that, which is good, the eyes on the right prize.
Yep.
But then it's interesting here is the question was proposed: Did the proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax influence who you decided to vote for in the recent federal election? 75% said yes, Ben. 75%
that
said
surprised
yes.
me. I would have said maybe on a good day, Bryce, it might have been, say, 55, 60%, but 75%, so 3/4 of people said, I voted against tax reform in this particular area is material when we're talking about 2.5 million property investors out there who are voters, and we know it's 2.5 million based on the individual tax returns, but some people still buy properties in companies and all of these other things. That may have flavoured their view. So, obviously Labor have got to look internally in terms of what their policy, their future tax policy is going to be. But that is a clear indication that effectively this was more important than roads, infrastructure, public housing, education. They are telling you that they voted purely on this tax consequence. So it
makes sense when you've got a sophisticated investor, though, isn't it? Because it's all about, they have because the amount of times that I spoke to someone and they go, oh yeah, I actually wasn't aware of that on the radar, even though they were a property investor. Yep. Whereas if you've got someone who's 2+, their headspace is right in this game. So they knew that would affect not only the potential for future buy, but it changed the landscape of which they were playing in, which was different to the decision that they made to purchase in the first place.
Correct.
So it was significant.
Yeah, and grandfathering the change is not so much important. I mean, again, you mentioned it before about long-term capital growth returns, right? So just because you might grandfather a policy, it's still going to impact future capital gains, right? Because if you take the demand out of that market, those capital gains so these investors have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money and the bank's money, and they're looking to self-fund their retirement or do whatever they can. So it really is quite powerful to understand. And yet, what was also interesting, if we look at the next question, does your property investment or your combined portfolio generate positive income or negative cash flow right now? Now,
this is big.
This is big, right? I mean, we've got 42% of people saying that their portfolio is negatively geared. We've got 24% who says that it's positively geared. We've got 23% when the survey was done saying neutral, and 10% saying not applicable. So from that point of view, obviously there was 10% of people who may have not got a portfolio yet. But you add the 23 and the 24% together, and you've got effectively 47% who are neutral.
Which is more than the negative.
Which is more than the negative, and that's a combination of obviously paying debt down and lower interest rates.
That was a big part of what you were talking about during that process,
where
the greedy negative gearers, well, it was less than half of it. You know.
And it's only a moment in time before your portfolio will eventually move to positively geared.
But that would change if you had more first-time investors, which is the point.
Yep.
First-time investors require the negative gearing early days,
start, yes.
And then over time, as you move through the portfolio, you swing to the other side of the fence.
Because that's the risk you've got, Bryce. When if let's say you take negative gearing out, you absolutely drop the supply side. All right, so anyone who's doing any modelling from Treasury or any of the, the economic modelling houses, I would also encourage you when you're doing your modelling to start to think about the economic consequences on the other side of the ledger. So in other words, if property investors don't invest, there's going to be a shortfall of accommodation, or the government's going to have to kick in. Now, I want to sort of see a model done in terms of how much it costs the government to run social housing and how much they have to keep doing repairs and fix-ups and making that property in good lettable order compared to how a mum and dad investor does it. And I will promise you there will be a net negative impact to the overall government spend. I'm talking federal and state, because that's the responsibility of the states, right? So it might have led to a little bit of money coming into federal coffers, but the cost to be able to run that, we run property investment so much more efficiently. I'd even have a stab in the dark, and it's just a stab in the dark, but I reckon we run it about a third cheaper than what governments can run housing, all right, rental accommodation. So if we're doing that, plus we're not seeing big, huge negative stories around, living in squalor and all that type of thing. So that is a big message for all of the bean counters out there who think that they're going to get a big uplift. No, they're not. They're going to get limited supply, which means shortage, which means property prices will grow. And then who's going to provide that accommodation? It's not an easy answer, I get it, but I think the system that we've got right now is working, but there can be more things that we can do to improve it even better.
Very good, Ben. The next two questions I think are the poster questions for the Property Couch.
Okay, here we
go.
Because
the first one here is, would you buy an established house, an off-the-plan unit, a new house and land, or a vacant land? Reassuringly, the answers reflect all of the teachings that we've had over the podcast for the last 250 plus episodes, because 91% of sophisticated veteran investors, meaning it's not their first rodeo, 91% said existing or established. That is a major tick for what we've been talking about for 250 odd episodes. 1% said 1% said off the plan units, 4% said new house and land, and 2% said vacant land, Ben. That is refreshing to hear.
Super refreshing to hear.
Success leaves clues.
For all of our listeners, please understand the reason why we are going through this verbatim is the idea that this is your audience, this is your marketplace. If you want to become a better knowledgeable investor, then you need to understand these components. And it's very clear from the success leaves clues that Bryce just said that they don't touch this type of accommodation. Off the plan properties are on the nose, and even new property at 4% says to me that the return on investment isn't sufficient enough to warrant them to continually keep going back in there. So that is a big news story for us in terms of getting that message out there. It's a challenge for the construction industry. It's going to be a challenge for the apartment market moving forward. And hopefully they'll overcome that through, building stock that is owner-occupier appeal, rather than just building for volume's sake.
All right, so the next question on the poster questions, Ben, is, do you intend to buy your next investment property in a different state than the one you live in, i.e. borderless investing? 45% said yes, 24% no, and 31% said they were unsure. But the important point here is the fact that people are now looking to maybe rent vest, Ben. They might be renting in a market that's too hot for them to be in, and they might be able to go and buy in another market that gives them an entry level that's... So say you're in Sydney, for example, priced out, Ben, go and rent and actually buy into a Brisbane market or the Adelaide market, or even opportunities down in the Melbourne market.
100%.
So two questions that 45% said yes, 31% said unsure, so there's a little bit of an opportunity there, but only 1 out of 4 people said no, they wouldn't do it.
Now, the next question is a typical layup question that you'll find in all of these survey type reports. You've got to put it in there. It probably means very little to us, but we'll do the around the grounds because, again, we believe that there are markets within markets. General commentary doesn't help anyone, but I'll quickly do the around the grounds. Brisbane came in number 1 as the next best location to invest in.
So let's set it up. Offers the best investment prospects. Which state capital do you believe currently offers the best investment
for the next
prospects?
12 months? Brisbane was 44% of people. Melbourne coming in second at 27%. Sydney relighting its wick, coming in at 14%. Then we go over to Perth at 4%. Then we go down to Hobart at 2%, Canberra at 1%, thanks to their land tax issues, because that should have been a lot higher if they didn't have land tax there, as high as they do. And then number 1, or 1% I should say, was Darwin.
Darwin.
And then we wrap it up in terms of metropolitan areas. 73% of people said metropolitan is the best place, followed by regional markets at 15%, followed by 8% for coastal, and followed by 1% for mining. Again, we don't put too much time into these in our own investigative research because we can still find great opportunities in metro and regional and in some coastal communities. If, for example, you have to find yield over strong growth, some of those things are important. Let's change the pace a little bit, Bryce, and let's move into, an area that's important for me in terms of trying to bring regulation into this property market. I've said all along, the governments are playing on the fringes, the regulators are playing on the fringes. The regulators would like to introduce regulated property investment advice, but we're not seeing that happen here. So this question leads into where have you sought, or where do you plan to seek property investment advice from? Now, number 1, which I'm pleased has come in, is obviously property investment advisor. I really, it should just be daylight between the next ones, but we do see buyers advocates and buyers agents in there. Now, I'll qualify that.
Yeah, ease up.
Yeah,
mate, pull up.
Well, the point for me is in terms of...
I'm joking. Some buyers agents don't have any clue about investing.
No, that's right. I mean, or they've got the very, very basics and that's about it, right? And, we know what happens when you're a jack of all trades, master of none. So I'd much prefer to see the advice around the personal cash flows and what's possible and the returns on investment that you're looking to achieve from a qualified property investment advisor first. And then I'd be very happy to see the buyer's agents who are doing the execution on the negotiation. So spotting and negotiating makes sense to me. That was at 53%. Then we had mortgage brokers. Now, this is where... if I see so many people on the Four Corners and the 60 Minutes and the 7:30 programs of this world and the Current Affair who have lost their money, have usually got advice from one of these next 4 or so people, and that is mortgage brokers, accountants, financial planners, property managers, real estate agents, family and friends, right? They shouldn't be the people that you go and speak to get detailed property investment advice. The caveat on the family and friend is, if that person has self-funded their retirement and has built out a track record, and have got a track record, then you are dealing with a subject matter expert. But if you're talking to Uncle Bob or Auntie Merrill at a barbecue and they've got one investment property they've bought in a mining town, run a mile, okay, in terms of, because they're going to talk, it's so easy, we don't pay anything to the government. Don't go there. But if they've got a proven track record, then you absolutely ask them the question. But if you want professional advice, and that would be, from my point of view, is someone who's qualified to give that and who has the formal education, not just the title and the name, because anyone can call themselves an entrepreneur, a CEO, a managing director these days, or whatever. So you can call yourself whatever you want in terms of property investment advisor, mortgage coach or investor coach or whatever it is, or educator. So have a look at their formal qualifications and see if they've done any undertaking, because as a mortgage broker you have to be licensed and you have to do a diploma. For buyer's agent you have to be a licensed real estate agent. Accountants, great at tax, they can do the taxation advisory work. Property managers, excellent looking after your property and the tenants. Then it falls away. Financial planners, really for defence, income protection, life, trauma, TPD, those types of things. I wouldn't be getting property investment advice from a financial planner. And if any financial planner tells you, Bryce, that your family home or any type of property is not an investment, then I would also put a question mark there as well. I'm not quite sure. I'm an absolute believer that your family home is an investment, and it should be so. Real estate agent, Sols agents came in at 19%, family and friends came in at 11%. Now, we will put a link in the show notes where people can download the infographics, so you can see those in more detail.
Financial planner has to make recommendations what's on their approved product list, Ben. Generally, residential real estate is nowhere near that approved product list, so what happens then is they find themselves dancing with property in terms of And so the caveat is I know financial planners. One of my better mates is a financial planner who recommends you use a buyer's advocate so that you can get established property. But you're quite right. You don't want to be talking to a generalist. You want to be talking to a specialist. And you'd probably even admit yourself, question without notice, that whilst you started out as the mortgage broker that Chris Bowen suggested back in the day, you probably wouldn't profess that you can go and get the best loan right now because you're not in the game.
No, that's right. I haven't been active.
You have the headlines,
Correct.
you understand how to structure it all together, but suggesting that just because you know mortgage broking means that you can go and get the right loan for someone. It's the same.
It'll take me a good week to get up to speed with all of the nuances in the lending space at the moment that I'd feel comfortable enough in getting in front of a client.
The property market moves so quickly. You'd have to, I haven't put a deal together for a client, this year.
Yep.
So just to even have my finger on the pulse would take me that time just to get back and get in the rhythms and all those sorts of things. So
I mean, we're fortunate that we do a lot of work and we've got a lot of properties being bought and a lot of lending being done through. So we get that fed back up to us. But you're absolutely right.
We get the association through our team. We're doing a terrific job.
Correct.
So there you go, folks. Where have you sought or where do you plan to seek property investment advice? Make sure you're at the top end of that at the property investment advisor level rather than at the generalist level.
Well, rounds out, Bryce, isn't it? Because here we are, we're finishing up now. We sort of say the consumer agrees with that too. In general, do you think that property investors need more investment education about the risks and potential benefits of investing in property? 88% of people say yes.
Yes.
So if you're dealing with a generalist, they're not going to know the nuances and the risks of the things that they're putting you into. A lot of financial planners and accountants and mortgage brokers can refer into property spruikers or property marketeers. We always say be very, very careful in regards to that. And rounding that out,
do you think any person providing information or advice on investing in property should, at the very least, have some level of formal property investment education or training? Ben, the people who have been doing this 2 or more times have said yes, 93%.
So it's pretty clear. Consumers want to make sure that they understand the risks. So don't go and, sort of cover over the risk. There is absolute risk in investing in property. We're seeing it now in regards to some of the reports coming out around negative equity in a lot of the off-the-plan market purchases that occurred in 2016. We said that was going to happen. Mm-hmm. It has happened. We said it happened in 2001 to 2003. We've seen it happen constantly. We say it verbatim on this podcast in regards to that they are the riskiest form of investing. Brand new property is the riskiest form of investing, and that's stacked up by the numbers in terms of the future returns that you're getting. So be very, very careful when you play in that space. And that's why we're always going to be advocating on behalf of the investor, the consumer, to make sure they're protected, but also saying to the regulators, I tell you what, if you wanted to take speculation out of the property market, there's one simple thing you can do. You can regulate the property investment market, which means that the people who are advising on property need to have a formal qualification to be able to do so, and the professional indemnity insurance that goes with that, and make sure it's all wrapped up comfortably. And then we would have a professional industry which would take the speculation out, take the aggression of the get-rich-quick stuff that goes on in our space, and we would have a more sustainable property investment environment, and more people can create financial peace through investing in property.
Very good, Ben. Very special thanks to our good friend Peter Koulizos on behalf of PIPA.
And the board.
For letting us go through those details. Hopefully that's given you a bit of insight over the last 12 months. We've done that now. I think that's our third time.
Yep. And I think it's important that people see the trends. So summarising the trends, it's, lending's becoming a little bit easier. Property's back in flow. That's pretty clear. Mm-hmm. They voted with their feet in, or with their voting ballots,
with their voting slips.
In terms of what that looks like. The market is looking okay, but I think there's still ways in which we can improve it.
Established houses are still the top choice. Investors are looking for better deals when it comes to finance, and good to hear that professional investors want to see greater standards.
Yeah,
professional standards.
Very good.
Which is good. Ben, normally this is the point where I'd go, my life hack today is,
because we're reversing it over, we're a bit of a roll. So Bryce, I bought my phone in here, it's sitting on the desk, right? Yep. I'm not touching it at the moment.
All right.
So we'll see whether this works, right? So for those of you who don't know, but you can actually now send voice texts. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty easy to do. So I'm going to give it a go on my Apple phone. So drum roll, because hopefully Apple won't let us down, Ivis. What do you reckon? Here we go. Hey Siri, can you send a text message to Bryce Holdaway saying, "Go the Pies"?
Your message to Bryce Holdaway says, "Go the Pies." Ready to send it?
No.
Yes.
Okay, it's sent.
Oh, no.
There we go, right? So if you're hands-free in a car, remember you should never ever pick up your phone or touch your phone whilst you're driving.
$400 fine.
$400 fine, but even you should never do it. It's dangerous. People die.
Agreed.
People get hit in. There's the money smarts. I get that. It's good.
Yeah,
it's
mate,
money.
it's out of your offset.
So it's important that, so you can do that. And I do it every night, just letting Jane know that I'm on my way home.
Oh.
So I sort of send a message to Jane saying leaving now, so she just knows that I'm on my way. But it's just a very handy way where you can be hands-free, and so there's my life hack. So just, go onto the socials and give my rating in terms of my one life hack compared to Bryce's last 50, and tell me which one you like the best.
Yeah. Well, Ivis, there's an opportunity there for you. Oh, thanks for making that noise in the background. There's an opportunity for you to sort of get stuck into him that he didn't come up with an Android life hack.
Oh.
Yes.
Well, we've got an Android one coming up real soon.
When?
So don't worry about it. Well, as soon as Google go from beta to open on their new platform, watch this space.
Watch this space.
So there you go. And Bryce, did you know?
Well, Ben, did you know
Yes.
that it appears that here's a couple of things I didn't realise you'd done.
Right, what's that?
Lead role in Gandhi, a part of Schindler's List.
Yeah, it's very good in Schindler's List.
You were in Schindler's List?
Yep.
Yeah. So because if I happen to scroll down to the charts on the podcast, I go to iTunes, I push iTunes, then I go through and I check and I put C all for the top categories. And then if I go business, because that's the business category we're in, and then we pop up and we're the sixth show in the top 10 this week, which is nice. Thank you to our community. And then I click on that, Ben, and then I go through and I scroll down, and then it says the hosts, and it's gone around to the internet, Ben.
It has. It's used AI, image recognition.
AI, and it's found an image of me, and I've had a look, and I thought, yep, that's me, long time ago, but it's definitely me.
Very young and fit you.
And then,
certainly seen a lot of sunshine since then, haven't you?
And then, mate, you've set that up beautifully for me. Then I see this wonderful photo of you.
Yes. Sir Ben Kingsley.
And Sir Ben Kingsley.
Knighted.
Schindler's List. Gandhi. All those sorts of things.
Mate, I'm also in Iron Man,
Did you
Probably
realise?
Sexy Beast is one of the most
You've won an Oscar,
roles.
Ben. You've won a Grammy. You've won a BAFTA. You've won 2 Golden Globes. You've won a Screen Actors Guild Award. And you've been knighted. Mate, I did not realise. Mm-hmm. So, folks, we might get Ivis to see if she can help us out. We'll just do a few little instructions.
Yeah, we can do a cut and paste.
Well, actually, it's on socials. We'll do that. Make it easy for everyone. We'll put it up on socials. I think Ivis might have actually already done it. Just to see the great man yourself.
And for the record, because obviously they'll work out the AI and eventually pick the right picture, which is probably I'm more flattered to be shown up as this global actor. But his real name, because he wasn't born Ben Kingsley.
Well, I'm glad
I was born Ben Kingsley.
The final part of my Did You Know is Krishna Pandit Banji.
Yes.
Born on 31st of December 1943.
New Year's Eve.
That's the only thing you do look like you've been born in 43, so it's... but
too true.
There we go, folks. Krishna Pandit Banji
is now known as the actor
Sir
Ben Kingsley.
Ben Kingsley.
Ben? No, try Ben. Very good.
That's
a great Did You Know, Bryson. So,
that's a great Did You Know. That's the best one I've done, is it?
Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering. But only if you act on it. See you next week, folks. Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarises the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.